Hello and welcome dear students. Today we are going to discuss an important topic of endocrinology, that is the hypothalamic nuclei and their functions. The objectives of today's lecture are to get a brief idea about the hypothalamus in general, followed by a detailed account of the hypothalamic nuclei and their functions. We'll also try to know about the hormones of the hypothalamus, then we'll briefly understand the hypothalamic pituitary system. And finally, we'll describe the hormones that regulate the anterior and posterior pituitary functions. To begin with, let us first discuss the hypothalamus. For many years, the pituitary gland or hypophysis was called the master endocrine gland because it secretes several hormones that control the endocrine glands. We now know that the pituitary gland itself has a master, the hypothalamus. The small region of the brain below the thalamus is the major link between the nervous and the endocrine systems. Cells in the hypothalamus synthesize at least 9 different hormones and the pituitary gland secretes 7. Together, these hormones play an important role in the regulation of virtually all the aspects of growth, development, metabolism, and homeostasis. Hypothalamus, a small central region of the brain, is located at the base of the diencephalon of the forebrain. It is present just beneath the thalamus. It is considered as a neuroendocrine structure rather than a true endocrine gland. Its secretion is called neurohormone. It develops from the ectoderm of the embryo. It represents an important integrating center for many important homeostatic functions and established link between the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system. In general, the hypothalamus performs the following important functions. It controls the anterior pituitary hormone secretion. It produces neurohormones which control the secretions. It controls the food intake. It also controls the body temperature. It controls the thirst and urine output. It regulates the emotional and behavioral patterns. And it controls the sleeping patterns and wakefulness. Now, moving on to the hypothalamic nuclei and their functions. The hypothalamus consists of several nuclei which may be divided into different regions. These regions include an anterior, middle, or tuberal and posterior component. Each nuclei is responsible for a variety of functions. Hypothalamus in general is described as 4 regions: preoptic, supraoptic, tuberal, and mammillary, which can be described as preoptic region. The preoptic region anterior to the supraoptic region is usually considered as a part of the hypothalamus because it participates with the hypothalamus in regulating certain autonomic activities. The preoptic region harbors the medial and lateral preoptic nuclei. Supraoptic region. The supraoptic region lies superior to the optic chiasm and contains the paraventricular nucleus, supraoptic nucleus, anterior hypothalamic nucleus, and suprachiasmatic nucleus. Axons from the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei form the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract, which extends through the infundibulum to the posterior lobe of the pituitary. Now, the tuberal region. The tuberal region, the widest part of the hypothalamus, includes the dorsomedial nucleus, ventromedial nucleus, and arcuate nucleus, plus the stalk-like infundibulum, which connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. The median eminence is a slightly raised region that encircles the infundibulum supraoptic region. Now, the mammillary region. The mammillary region adjacent to the midbrain is the most posterior part of the hypothalamus. It includes the mammillary bodies and the posterior hypothalamic nuclei. The mammillary bodies are 2 small, rounded projections that serve as relay stations for reflexes related to the sense of smell. The hypothalamus controls various major body activities and is one of the major regulators of homeostasis. Sensory impulses related to both somatic and visceral senses arrive at the hypothalamus, as do impulses from the receptors of vision, taste, and smell. Other receptors within the hypothalamus itself continually monitor osmotic pressure, blood glucose level, certain hormone concentrations, and other related processes. The hypothalamus has several important connections with the pituitary gland and produces a variety of hormones. Some functions of the hypothalamus are attributed to specific hypothalamic nuclei, while others are not so precisely localized. The important function of the hypothalamus can be summarized as: number first, control of the autonomic nervous system, ANS. The hypothalamus controls and integrates activities of the autonomic nervous system, which in turn regulates muscle contraction and secretions of many glands. Axons extend from the hypothalamus to parasympathetic and sympathetic nuclei in the brainstem and spinal cord. The hypothalamus regulates major visceral activities through the ANS, including regulation of heart rate, movement of food through the gastrointestinal tract, and the urinary bladder contraction. Now, the regulation of the circadian rhythms and states of consciousness. The suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus serves as the body's internal biological clock, as it establishes circadian rhythms. This nucleus receives input from the eyes and sends output to other hypothalamic nuclei, the reticular formation and the pineal gland. Now, the regulation of the emotional and behavioral patterns. The hypothalamus, together with the limbic system, regulates the emotional and behavioral patterns related to rage, aggression, pain, pleasure, and sexual arousal. Now, the control of the body temperature. The hypothalamus acts as the body's thermostat. If the temperature of blood flowing through the hypothalamus is above normal, the hypothalamus directs the autonomic nervous system to stimulate heat loss promote activities. Similarly, when the blood temperature is below normal, the hypothalamus generates impulses promoting heat production and retention. Now, the regulation of eating and drinking. The hypothalamus contains a feeding, satiety, and a thirst center which promotes eating, causes a sensation of fullness and a sensation of thirst, respectively. When certain cells in the hypothalamus are stimulated by rising the osmotic pressure of the extracellular fluid, they cause the sensation of thirst. The intake of water by drinking restores the osmotic pressure to normal, removing the stimulation and relieving the person from thirst. Now, the production of hormones. The hypothalamus produces various hormones and has generally two connections with the pituitary gland. First, the hypothalamic hormones, known as the hypothalamic releasing and inhibiting hormones, are released into the capillary networks in the median eminence. The bloodstream carries these hormones directly to the anterior pituitary, where they either stimulate or inhibit the secretions of the anterior pituitary hormones. Secondly, the axons extend from the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei through the infundibulum into the posterior pituitary. These neurons make one of two hormones, oxytocin or vasopressin. Their axons transport the hormones to the posterior pituitary, where they are finally released. Let us now discuss the hormones of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is generally considered as a neuroendocrine structure, and its secretion is referred as a neurohormone. The hormones originating in the neurons of the hypothalamus generally pass through axons and are released from the nerve endings. These hormones, on reaching the pituitary gland through a portal circulatory system, regulate the functions of the anterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary is under the direct neural regulation control of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamic hormones regulate the secretion and synthesis of the pituitary hormones. Based on their action, these hormones are known as releasing hormones as they stimulate the secretion of the pituitary hormones, or inhibiting hormones which inhibit the secretion of the pituitary hormones. For example, a hypothalamic hormone called gonadotropin-releasing hormone (GnRH) stimulates the pituitary to synthesize and release of gonadotropins, while as another hypothalamic hormone, that is somatostatin, inhibits the release of the growth hormone from the pituitary. The well-known releasing and inhibitory hormones of the hypothalamus are described as follows. Number first, thyrotropin-releasing hormone (TRH). It stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete the thyroid-stimulating hormone TSH or thyrotropin. Number second, adrenocorticotropin-releasing hormone. It stimulates the anterior pituitary to produce adrenocorticotropic hormone ACTH. Number third, the follicle-stimulating hormone releasing hormone FSH-RH. It stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete the follicle-stimulating hormone. Number fourth, luteinizing hormone releasing hormone LHRH. It stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete the luteinizing hormone. Number fifth, growth hormone releasing hormone. It stimulates the anterior pituitary to release the growth hormone GH or somatotropin. Now, the growth hormone release inhibiting hormone or somatostatin. It inhibits the secretion of growth hormone from the anterior pituitary. Now, prolactin releasing hormone. It stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete the prolactin or luteotrophic hormone. Next, prolactin release inhibiting hormone. It inhibits the secretion of prolactin from the anterior pituitary. Melanocyte stimulating hormone releasing hormone. It stimulates the intermediate lobe of the pituitary gland to release the melanocyte stimulating hormone. Melanocyte stimulating hormone release inhibiting hormone. It inhibits the release of melanocyte stimulating hormone from the intermediate lobe of the pituitary gland. Okay students, let us now understand the hypothalamic pituitary hypophyseal system. The hypothalamic hormones which release or inhibit the anterior pituitary hormones reach the anterior pituitary through a portal system. In a usual sense, blood passes from the heart through an artery to a capillary to a vein and then back to the heart. In a portal system, the blood flows from one capillary network into a portal vein and then into a second capillary network before returning to the heart. The name of the portal system indicates the location of the second capillary network. In the hypophyseal portal system, blood flows from capillaries in the hypothalamus into portal veins that carry blood to capillaries of the anterior pituitary. The hypothalamic releasing and inhibiting hormones are transported within axons and released at the axon terminals. The hormones first diffuse into the capillaries of the primary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system and are carried by the hypophyseal portal veins to the secondary plexus of the hypophyseal portal system in the anterior pituitary. The hypothalamic pituitary system is of great importance for homeostasis as it regulates the body's major physiological activities. It also represents a close connection and coordination between the hormonal and nervous systems, where actually the nerve impulses are translated into chemical messages. Now, coming on to the hormones of the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary secretes 6 principal peptide hormones called the trophic hormones. Except the growth hormone and prolactin, all other hormones have their major effects restricted to specific target organs. Let us discuss them one by one. Gonadotrophins. Gonadotrophins are secreted by the anterior pituitary cells called gonadotrophs, which are the complex glycoprotein hormones. They are of around 28 kilodalton molecular weight. They each consist of two glycoprotein subunits, alpha and beta, with the beta sequence being different for luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone respectively. For the proper interaction of the gonadotrophins with their target gland receptors, the common subunit A is of prime importance. Luteinizing hormone. In females, a surge of luteinizing hormone in association with follicle stimulating hormone at mid-cycle induces ovulation and then maintains the corpus luteum after ovulation, secreting progesterone. In males, it stimulates the interstitial cells in the testes to produce testosterone. Follicle stimulating hormone FSH. The follicle stimulating hormone in association with luteinizing hormone helps in the development of the ovarian follicle and stimulates spermatogenesis in case of males. Thyrotropin, thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH. Thyrotropin is a glycoprotein hormone which consists of two polypeptide chains, alpha and beta. Its main function is to stimulate the thyroid gland to secrete the thyroid hormones triiodothyronine T3 and thyroxine T4, which is achieved as follows. The stimulation of thyroid iodide uptake, the increased synthesis of the thyroidal storage protein, thyroglobulin, the stimulation of T3, T4 synthesis and release, and an increase in the thickness of the follicular epithelium and vascularity of the thyroid gland. Excess thyroid stimulating hormone can result in goiter. Corticotrophin adrenocorticotrophic hormone ACTH or corticotrophin. Corticotrophin adrenocorticotrophic hormone ACTH is a single-chain peptide hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary cells called corticotrophs, which consists of 39 amino acids and is derived from a larger precursor molecule, pre-pro-opiomelanocortin (POMC). ACTH stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete glucocorticoids, cortisol mostly, and also small amounts of sex hormones, androgens and estrogens, which is mediated by specific high-affinity ACTH receptors present on the adrenal cell membrane linked to intracellular production of cyclic adenosine monophosphate, that's CAMP. The synthetic preparation tetracosectrin containing the first 24 amino acid sequence of ACTH may be given intramuscularly or intravenously to test the adrenocortical function. Prolactin. Prolactin secreted by the anterior pituitary cells lectotrophs is a single-chain peptide with a similar chemical structure as that of growth hormone GH. It is primarily involved in the development of the female breasts and in the initiation and maintenance of lactation shortly after the childbirth. It is released from the pituitary in larger amounts during pregnancy and in response to suckling by means of a sensory neural reflex arising in the nipple. The suckling reflex also depends on the prior sensitization of the secretory alveoli of the breast by estrogen. The function of prolactin in human males is unknown, but the excess prolactin levels can exert powerful inhibitory effects on both male and female gonadal functions and libido, primarily via actions on the central nervous system and also by suppression of growth hormone releasing hormone release. Growth hormone. Growth hormone, somatotrophin, is the most abundant hormone of the pituitary trophic hormones, but unlike them, it can influence a variety of target tissues. It is a single-chain peptide with 191 amino acids and 2 disulfide bridges. Growth hormone promotes linear growth of bone, especially long bones, by stimulating the growth and calcification of the epiphyseal cartilage cells. It also influences the growth of visceral organs, adipose and connective tissues, endocrine glands, and striated muscles. At early childhood stage, particularly at puberty, the levels of growth hormone are at the highest. Then these levels steadily decline throughout life, which implies that growth hormone may not be essential for normal adult health. However, according to some recent researches, the growth hormone deficiency may be involved in some symptoms of aging, and treatment of elderly individuals with growth hormone has been identified to provide beneficial effects on body composition and bone density. Overproduction of the growth hormone in the young results in abnormal body growth and gigantism. Growth hormone also antagonizes the peripheral action of insulin, and it is thus considered to be a diabetogenic hormone. Following are some of the principal effects of growth hormone on the protein, carbohydrate, and lipid metabolism. Stimulation of the cellular amino acid uptake and protein synthesis. Decreased glucose uptake by muscle and adipose tissue. Stimulation of lipolysis within adipose tissue and consequent increase in plasma free fatty acid levels, and the increased gluconeogenesis within the liver. Control of secretion by the anterior pituitary. The secretions of the anterior pituitary hormones are generally regulated in the following different ways. First of all, the neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus secrete 5 releasing hormones which stimulate the secretion of anterior pituitary hormones, and 2 inhibiting hormones which inhibits the secretion of the anterior pituitary hormones. Secondly, the negative feedback in the form of hormones released by target glands decrease secretion of 3 types of anterior pituitary cells. In such negative feedback loops, the secretory activity of gonadotrophs, thyrotrophs, and corticotrophs decrease when blood levels of the target gland hormones rise. For instance, adrenocorticotropic hormone ACTH stimulates the cortex of the adrenal gland to secrete glucocorticoids, mainly cortisol. In turn, an elevated blood level of cortisol decreases the secretion of both corticotrophin and corticotrophin releasing hormone CRH by suppressing the activity of the anterior pituitary corticotrophs and hypothalamic neurosecretory cells respectively. Now the hormones of the posterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary or neurohypophysis does not synthesize hormones, but it does store and release 2 hormones. It consists of axons and axon terminals of more than 10,000 hypothalamic neurosecretory cells. The cell bodies of the neurosecretory cells lies in the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus. Their axons form the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. This tract generally starts in the hypothalamus and ends near blood capillaries in the posterior pituitary. The neuronal cell bodies in the paraventricular nucleus synthesize the hormone oxytocin, and the neuronal cell bodies in the supraoptic nucleus produce antidiuretic hormone ADH, also called vasopressin respectively. The axon terminals in the posterior pituitary are associated with specialized neuroglia called pituocyte. These cells perform a similar supporting role as that of the astrocytes. Oxytocin and vasopressin are packaged into secretory vesicles after their production in the cell bodies of neurosecretory cells, which then move by fast axonal transport to the axon terminals in the posterior pituitary, where they are stored until release. The inferior hypophyseal arteries, which branch from the internal carotid arteries, supplies blood to the posterior pituitary. In the posterior pituitary, the inferior hypophyseal arteries drain into the capillary plexus of the infundibular process, a capillary network which receives secreted oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, that is vasopressin. Finally, the hormones pass into the posterior hypophyseal veins for distribution to the target cells in other tissues. Oxytocin. Oxytocin affects two target tissues, the mother's uterus and breasts, during and after the delivery of a baby. During delivery, stretching of the cervix of the uterus stimulates the release of oxytocin, which in turn enhances contraction of smooth muscle cells in the wall of the uterus after delivery. It also stimulates milk ejection from the mammary glands in response to the mechanical stimulus provided by a suckling infant. The function of oxytocin in males and in non-pregnant females is not clear so far. Researchers with animals have suggested that oxytocin has actions within the brain that foster parental caretaking behavior towards young offspring. It has also been studied that oxytocin could be responsible for the feelings of sexual pleasure. Antidiuretic hormone. As its name implies, an antidiuretic is a substance that decreases urine production. ADH causes the kidneys to return more water to blood, hence decreasing urine volume. In the absence of ADH, urine output increases more than tenfold from the normal. Drinking alcohol often causes frequent and copious urination because alcohol inhibits secretion of ADH. It also decreases the water loss through sweating and causes constriction of arterioles, which increases the blood pressure. Thus, to sum up, we can now say that the hypothalamus plays an important role in the endocrine system. It is responsible for maintaining the body's internal balance, which is known as homeostasis. To do this, the hypothalamus helps stimulate or inhibit many of the body's key processes like heart rate and blood pressure, body temperature, fluid and electrolyte balance including thirst, appetite and body weight, glandular secretions of the stomach and intestines, production of substances that influence the pituitary gland to release hormones and sleep cycles. Dear students, it was all about today's lecture. Hope you have understood it well. Goodbye.